Authority is not a fixed asset. It's a signal that other people are continuously reading, and it forms and it loses ground in moments that most leaders are not paying attention to. The title gives you the formal right to make decisions. It does not give you the signal that your judgment is trusted. The track record establishes a history, but it does not guarantee that your read of the current situation is being received with confidence. What people around you are actually reading continuously is something much more subtle. They are reading the consistency between what you project and what actually happens. They are reading how you behave when you are under pressure. They're also reading the gap, if there is one, between what you say and how you land. They are not forming an assessment from that reading, not explicitly and not consciously, but the assessment is definitely there. And it directly affects how people respond to your decisions, how much they would push back, or how much they commit to the direction that you are setting, and how much they tell you about what is actually happening in the organization. That is authority, not the formal structure, the signal. And in this video, I'm going to explain how that signal forms, how it loses ground without you noticing it, and why the most intuitive response to the problem tends to make it worse. A couple of words on who I am before we go further. I run a diagnostic practice for decision makers focusing on leadership risk in times of pressure. I've navigated through that pressure myself as someone who used to be on the leadership team of a global stock-listed financial group. Authority forms through accumulated small interactions, not through big moments. The big moments, so the critical decisions, the crisis well handled, and the difficult conversation that lands right, these do matter and people remember them, but they are not the primary mechanism. The primary mechanism is the pattern of small, repeated interactions that most leaders completely discount. And here's what I mean. How you respond when someone challenges your read in a meeting. Not whether you change your position, but how you hold the room in the moment of being challenged. Whether you become slightly more defensive, whether you invite the challenge or manage it away. It's also about whether the room watches you absorb it and continue thinking clearly, or watches you protect the decision that you have already made. It's how you communicate when you are uncertain, whether you project false confidence because certainty feels like the authoritative register, or whether you can hold uncertainty clearly and still give the room a direction to move in. These are different signals, and the people around you, they read both. How you behave when things go wrong, or whether you are consistent, or whether different versions of you appear when you are under pressure. It's about whether the mode that runs under stress is recognizably the same person, or whether people learn to manage around a different set of behaviors when the stakes are high. None of these are dramatic, and none of these are moments that leaders tend to debrief or analyze or think even about when they consider how they're showing up, because they're small moments. But they are the interactions that build that signal that you need, and they run in patterns. The pattern is what accumulates into authority or into something that looks like authority from the outside but does not carry the weight that it should. Authority loses ground in exactly the same way, through small repeatable moments, through patterns. And the way it happens is usually invisible to you. Here's a scenario that is more common than most people would expect. Imagine you are in a period of significant pressure, perhaps a transition or a restructuring, or a period where the strategic direction is uncertain, or a set of competing priorities that are pulling in different directions. This is normal conditions at senior levels. And under pressure, most leaders shift. What was measured becomes slightly more reactive. What was collaborative becomes slightly more directive. What was confident becomes slightly more brittle. This shift is often entirely invisible to you because you are in the middle of managing everything else. And your self-perception is anchored to who you are at baseline, not how that is currently translating under pressure. But the people around you are registering the shift. They are calibrating, they are adjusting what they say and what they bring to you. They are deciding what is safe to raise and what is better managed around. So the information flow changes and the conversations become slightly more managed. People will start protecting themselves from the reactive version of you, and you receiving more filtered information and making decisions on a less accurate picture, potentially being slightly more reactive in response to things and not moving as expected, you can find yourself in a progressively tighter loop. The authority that was present, the sense that the room was genuinely behind the direction, begins to lose ground, not through a single clear event, but through an accumulation of small frictions. You'll often attribute this to the environment or to the complexity, to the team not stepping up, and occasionally to yourself in a vague and unproductive way, saying that something is off, but I can't name it. What is actually happening is a gap between intent and impact, between how you mean to operate and how you are landing on the people around you. I want to stay with that gap for a moment because it is the most consequential thing I see in senior leadership and most systematically underestimated. The gap between intent and impact is not a character issue, and it is not about motivation, it's not about values or whether someone cares. It's structural. Self-perception becomes unreliable under pressure. Behavior shifts outside of conscious awareness, and the feedback mechanisms that would normally correct for this, the honest signal from the people around you, they are exactly the mechanisms that authority structures suppress. So the higher you are, the less accurate the information you receive about your own impact. And by the way, if you're finding this useful, subscribe to the channel because I publish regularly on this territory. There's research that maps what I described very precisely. Timo Vuori and Kihi published their research about what happened inside Nokia when the smartphone era arrived. And senior leaders were making critical strategic decisions. They believed they had an accurate picture of the organization's technical capabilities, of the morale of the engineering teams, and of the urgency of the competitive threat, but they did not. The information they were receiving had been shaped, it had been filtered, and in some cases, it had been inverted before it reached them. Not through deliberate deception, but through entirely normal authority dynamics. So the engineers knew things, the mid-level managers knew things. What they understood about the gravity of the situation was far more accurate than what the senior leadership was operating on. But the authority structure made it unsafe to bring that information upward. The leadership had communicated through signals, both explicit and implicit, what kinds of information and what kinds of responses were welcome. The organization adapted to those signals and showed the leadership what was safe to show. The executives were not receiving the signal they thought that they were receiving, and this is not an exceptional case. This is how authority structures work in every company by nature. When authority concentrates, information flow adapts. And people calibrate to power. They learn what is rewarded and what creates risk, and they behave accordingly. It's only human. The result, though, is that leaders at the top of an organization, where you probably are, you're routinely operating on a picture that has been shaped by your own authority before it reaches you. So the people that most need the accurate information about your impact, about how you're landing, about what is actually happening in the organization, you are the ones with the least reliable access to it. The perception gap is present to some degree in most senior leaders most of the time. But there is a specific context where the cost of it rises quite heavily. And those contexts are also almost always the ones where you are least equipped to read the signal clearly because you are managing everything else at the same time. The first example is a new role. When you move into a new organization or a new remit or a significantly expanded position, the authority signal has to be rebuilt from zero. You are operating in a new context with the same pattern you brought from the last one. And the early months, the first interactions, the first meetings, the first decisions under observation are the window in which the signal forms. But most of your attention during this period is on the content of the role. What are the priorities? What are the key relationships? What does the strategy require? Those are important questions, but the authority signal is running in parallel and quite often unmanaged, and it's setting a tone that will be very difficult to revise later, and yet it's the one that determines your success. The second example is board or investor scrutiny. When you are under scrutiny from above, the most common response is to perform, to project certainty, control, and confidence more deliberately than usual. You want to manage the image of how you are landing. And it kind of makes sense. But an experienced board reads this immediately, even subconsciously, not necessarily as a specific failure, but as a change in signal. So something is different from when the pressure was lower, the performance was legible, and it creates exactly the trust question that you are trying to resolve. The third example is post-acquisition integrations. When you are integrating an acquired team, you are operating with two grounds, reading your authority signal simultaneously. You have your existing team who already have a pattern with you, and then the acquired team who are assessing from scratch what kind of a leader they are now reporting to. And every interaction in the first weeks of an integration is forming that assessment. Most of your attention, though, in this context is on the business problems and on the business integration, the operational integration, the retention questions, the process alignment, the people alignment. The authority signal in the acquired team is running completely in the background, and the perception gap, when it's left unread, often becomes the primary source of integration friction before anyone can name it. In all three of these contexts, the stakes of the gap are highest, and the clarity available to you from the inside, the situation is the lowest. That combination is where the most consequential decisions are made on the least accurate picture. Let me make this more concrete. There's a specific kind of conversation that I've seen dozens of times. A leader, competent and self-aware, describes how they communicate in their leadership team. Collaborative, open to challenge, careful to create space for different perspectives, direct but not dominating, and then separately, the people on that team describe the actual experience. What emerges is a gap, not a fabrication on either side. The leader means exactly what he describes, and their intention is genuine. But something is happening between the intention and how it's landing. It might be that the body language under pressure communicates certainty, while the words are inviting input and the room reads the body language. It might also be that the leadership's responses to challenge, while not explicitly closing the conversation, are slightly quicker to return to their original positioning than they realize. It might also be that the meetings have a pattern, a subtle pattern, where the most important decisions are already resolved before the room arrives, and the apparent openness is a curtsy rather than a live process. None of this is visible to you, and all of it is visible to the people around you. And all of this is shaping the quality of information that you receive, the quality of commitment you get to the direction you set, and the speed and reliability of execution. This is the perception gap, and it is present to some degree in almost every decision maker I work with. Not because they are unaware or difficult or poor leaders, quite the contrary. It's because the structural conditions that create it are the normal conditions of senior leadership when you reach a certain altitude. When someone can actually read this, and I mean read it precisely, not in generalities, the picture that becomes visible is specific. Not that you are doing something broadly wrong, not a general observation about communication or style, but specifically in this type of interaction under these conditions with these stakeholders, this is what is happening in the pattern. And this is what that creates in the system around you. That specificity is what makes it actionable. Because once you can see the specific moments where authority is forming and the specific moments where it loses ground and the specific gap between the intent and how it's landing, the adjustments are narrow. They are not general efforts or to communicate differently. They are precise. They are what to hold more firmly, or where the projection of certainty is closing down information that needs to come in. It's what's being said with confidence that the room is not reading with confidence. It's where the small shift in how something is communicated would change significantly how it lands. And the authority does not rebuild through a grand reset. It rebuilds through the same mechanisms it formed in the first place. So through these small repeatable moments, through the pattern. And this is what proper diagnostic makes visible. If you can recognize the gap I've been describing, there's two places to go from here. The first is my newsletter. I send it out every 2 weeks, and the content is closer to what I have been discussing today. The operational picture, the mechanism, the specific consequence, than anything that I would publish publicly. The link is in the description. And the second place to go is to have a direct conversation, a short introduction call. A way to contact me is also linked below the video. And if you haven't done so already, remember to subscribe.